Ethan Hale's log cabin clung to the sheer slope of the Rockies like an old, festering scar that refused to heal. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of half-burnt pine and the solitude that had fermented over 3 long years. On the wall opposite his bed, a dusty Navy SEAL medal lay next to the photos of a woman and an infant, the only remnants of Ethan's former life, the life that had died, with his wife and child in an accident that he, a seasoned combat soldier, was powerless to prevent. 37 years old, Ethan looked older. Deep lines etched around his eyes, a long scar running from his temple down his jawbone, a souvenir from shrapnel in Afghanistan, made his face look perpetually clenched in pain. He woke instantly, not because of the frantic shriek of the wind outside the wooden walls, but because of Shadow's unnatural silence. The 6-year-old German shepherd, also a veteran with a back leg that limped from a landmine, stood rigid by the doorway. Its ears were pricked, its spine taut as a wire. Ethan threw off the blanket, his bare feet hitting the cold floor. He instinctively grabbed the pistol from under his pillow and moved toward the door. Shadow let out a low whine in its throat, nose raised, sniffing the air. Talp! Talp! The sound was too faint, almost swallowed by the howling blizzard outside. At this altitude of 3,000 meters, about 10,000 feet, at this hour, a knock could only mean trouble or death. Ethan yanked the bolt. The wind and snow blasted in, threatening to tear the house apart, bringing with it the sub-zero. Skin-slicing cold, a figure collapsed into his chest. Ethan instinctively caught the woman. She was feather-light, so gaunt that her ribs showed clearly through her thin shirt, yet her arms were impossibly locked in a death grip. Ethan looked down, stunned. Clinging to the hips of this exhausted woman were 2 little girls, about 5 years old, attached to their mother like koalas. Their heads drooped on her shoulders, blue and motionless. The combined weight of 2 5-year-olds had to be nearly 88 pounds. How could such a slight woman have carried them? Behind her, an older girl, around 9, stumbled across the threshold and tumbled onto the floor, her hand still clutching her mother's hem like a final lifeline. "Get in," Ethan yelled over the wind, pulling the entire clinging cluster of people inside. He slammed the door shut, cutting off the shriek of winter. The room fell into an abrupt silence, broken only by the woman's heavy, ragged breathing. She slid onto the wooden floor, but still didn't release the 2 small children. "Let go," Ethan commanded, kneeling down to pry apart her white, stiff fingers. "You'll break their bones." The mother listlessly let go, her eyes vacant with exhaustion. Ethan quickly checked the 2 children. Weak pulse, skin cold as stone. Stage 2 hypothermia. Shadow warmed them. The dog understood immediately. It crawled forward, curling around the 2 twin girls, its thick fur rubbing against their cheeks, transferring its body heat to the small lives. Ethan shoved more wood into the stove, and the flame roared angrily. He turned back, stripped off the children's soaked coats, and wrapped them in dry-wool blankets. The older girl, Lucy, automatically crawled toward the fire, her teeth chattering, her wide eyes watching Ethan with fear. 10 minutes later, the warmth from the stove and the smell of hot canned chicken soup began to pull life back into the gloomy log cabin. The woman, Sarah Brennan, sat leaning against the table leg, her hand trembling as she held a mug of hot water. She stared at her 5-year-old daughters, who were beginning to stir beside. Shadow. She was too young, probably under 30, but hardship had aged her delicate face. "The car died at the curve," Sarah said, her voice hoarse and direct, her red-rimmed eyes meeting Ethan's. The battery failed. Ethan sat opposite her, his gaze sharp and scrutinizing. "That curve is 3 miles from here. It's a sheer incline. I know. You carried 2 5-year-olds? Each one is at least 40 pounds. In a blizzard." Sarah managed a weak smile, the grin of someone who had just walked through hell and survived. They couldn't walk anymore. "Mia has asthma. The cold wind was suffocating her. Lily won't go if her sister doesn't. I couldn't leave anyone behind. I'm their mother." Ethan was silent. He looked at her scratched, bleeding hands. Adrenaline could help a person do extraordinary things, but walking 3 miles up a mountain road, carrying 80 pounds, was a cruel miracle born of maternal love. One of the twins, the one on the left, let out a light cough. Shadow gently licked her hand in reassurance. "They look identical," Ethan remarked, pushing a bowl of soup towards Sarah. "Identical twins?" Sarah took the bowl of soup, her eyes clouding over. She looked at the coughing child, Mia, then at the other, Lily. A fleeting moment of hesitation crossed her face. "No," she replied flatly. Ethan raised an eyebrow, the scout soldier's curiosity stirring. "What? They look exactly alike." Sarah put the soup bowl down, taking a deep breath as if about to confess a terrible crime. "Mia is my daughter," she said, pointing to the girl on the left, her voice trembling. Then she pointed to Lily. "And Lily, I found her in a dumpster." The space contracted, heavy. Ethan didn't interrupt, just waited. 5 years ago, at the old tenement building, Sarah continued, her voice hardening with indignation as she recalled the past. Someone tossed her out like a bag of trash. She was as blue as she was tonight. The police said they'd take her to foster care. But I saw how they worked. Lost files, kids thrown from one home to another like merchandise. She reached out and adjusted the blanket on Lily. The gesture was so tender, a complete contrast to her haggard, tough exterior. My husband was still alive then, and he called me crazy. We were dirt poor, but I lied. I told everyone they were twins. I filed a late, fake birth certificate. I swore to her the night I pulled her out of that garbage heap that as long as I was breathing, she would never be abandoned again. Ethan looked at the slight woman across from him. A liar, a forger, and the greatest mother he had ever met. She was carrying a truth heavier than the 2 children she held in her arms tonight. She was running. "Why come up here?" Ethan asked bluntly. "This road is a dead end. Where are you running from?" "The landlord evicted us this morning." Sarah looked him straight in the eye, desperation shining clearly. Social services started questioning Lily's paperwork. "If they catch me, they'll separate her. I'd rather freeze to death on the mountain than let them take her." The logs in the stove crackled. Shadow lifted his head, looking at Ethan as if awaiting an order. He had chosen a side. He was protecting the children. Ethan stood up. He had spent 3 years building this solitude, running from the world that had stolen his family. But tonight, a stranger had kicked down that door, bringing 4 lives and a shocking secret into the den of the lonely old wolf. He walked to the cupboard, grabbing another blanket and tossing it to Sarah. "Sleep," he said gruffly, turning his back to hide the turmoil inside. The storm won't break anytime soon, and there are no social workers up here." Sarah looked at him, the tension on her shoulders collapsing. She didn't say thank you. Thanks were superfluous. Now, she just nodded, her eyes welling up with relief. She lay down, wrapping her arms around the 2 5-year-olds and Lucy, forming a living shield. Ethan sat in the old armchair by the window, his hand resting on Shadow's head. He looked out into the white night. His stillness was dead, and strangely, he didn't mourn it. But Ethan knew the blizzard was only the beginning. When the sun rose, the brutal reality of his own debts, the law, and the people hunting Sarah and her children would come knocking on his door. He loaded his pistol and placed it on his lap. Tonight, this house had a job to do. For days. That was all the time it took for Ethan Hale's fortress of solitude to completely crumble. Not due to enemy fire or a raid, but because of 2 small whirlwinds, named Lily and Mia. "Shadow, sit still." Mia's bright shout pierced the morning quiet. Ethan stood at the back door, axe in hand, looking inside with an expression his old SEAL teammates would never have believed. Shadow, the working dog who once mangled a terrorist's arm in Kandahar, was currently flattened on the wooden floor. Flanking him were the 2 5-year-olds, diligently tying a pink fabric strip, cut from Sarah's old shirt, onto his neck. Shadow didn't resist. He just gazed up at Ethan with his amber eyes, his tail giving a resigned thump-thump on the floor, as if to say, "I'm doing this for the kibble, boss." Don't pull it too tight, Ethan called out, his voice attempting to sound stern, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Lily, the girl Sarah found in the dumpster, looked up. She had bright eyes and a gap-toothed grin more reckless than her sister's. She released Shadow's neck, rushed out the door, and hugged Ethan's leg. Uncle Ethan, Shadow loves the bow. Ethan looked down at the tiny creature clinging to his leg. 5 years old, the age they should be in kindergarten, eating cotton candy, not surviving a death march in a blizzard. He's a male dog, kid, he mumbled, gently pried her hands off before turning back to the oak log. Thwack! The axe split the log cleanly in two. You're really good at chopping wood. Ethan didn't need to turn around to know who was speaking. Lucy, 9 years old, but seasoned like a little old woman. She was sitting on the steps, hugging her knees, observing him with sharp, brown eyes. Unlike her innocent twin sisters, Lucy was always vigilant. She watched how he held the axe, how he scanned his surroundings, as if assessing whether this man was trustworthy. Wrist strength, Ethan replied curtly, setting up another log. Not shoulder strength. Use your shoulder, and you'll break your arm in 10 minutes. Mom's shoulders often hurt too, Lucy said idly. She carried them all the time. Always. The axe handle in Ethan's hands froze mid-air. He lowered it, turning to look at her. Your mother is very strong, he said. Stronger than me. Lucy shrugged, her eyes darting away. Mom said we were a burden. I mean, she didn't say it, but the landlady did. She said no one would house her if she brought her gaggle of wild geese with her. She was wrong, Ethan stated firmly. Why? Because I housed you. He struck the next blow harder than necessary. Splinters flew. Lucy was silent for a moment, then she stood up, quietly picking up the pieces of wood he had chopped, stacking them neatly. Unasked, she was doing it automatically. That's how poor children survived. They try to be useful, so they wouldn't be chased away. Inside the house, the scent of slightly burnt pancakes wafted out. Sarah stood by the stove. She was still wearing one of Ethan's oversized sweaters, the sleeves rolled up past her slender elbows. The kitchen, which used to hold only canned goods and dust, was now strangely tidy. The chip bowls were scrubbed clean and stacked neatly. The floor was free of mud. She turned as Ethan walked in, carrying a hot plate of pancakes to the table. Eat, she said, avoiding his eyes, busy wiping her hands on her apron. The flour was a bit old, so they didn't rise much. Ethan sat down. Shadow had escaped the clutches of the twins, quietly slinking under the table, resting his head on Ethan's foot for peace. Breakfast passed with the clinking of cutlery and the vigorous chewing of the two 5-year-olds. A heart-wrenchingly simple family scene. But Ethan couldn't swallow his pancake. In his breast pocket, the tax notice felt like a smoldering ember. Deadline, 48 hours. Sarah placed a cup of black coffee in front of him. She didn't sit down to eat. She stood there, watching him, her hazel eyes sweeping over the old soldier's tense face. Is something wrong? She asked softly, low enough for the children not to hear. Ethan reached for his pocket, intending to pull the paper out, but stopped. He didn't want to ruin the first meal where the children had laughed freely after days of hunger. Just a chore, he lied, standing up. I have to go down to the town. That night, after the children were sound asleep, piled next to the fireplace like a litter of kittens, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table, the tax notice spread out before him under the flickering oil lamp. The bowl number at the bottom of the page stared back at him defiantly, $12,000. His savings had vanished into psychological treatment and medication for Shadow. His military pension was only enough to maintain a meager life. What options did he have? Sell his rifle? A few hundred. Sell the beat-up truck? No one would buy it. A slight sound. Sarah emerged from the shadows in the corner of the room. She was barefoot, walking silently like a cat. She pulled up a chair across from him, looking at the paper on the table, then into his eyes. She didn't ask what it was. She knew. Poverty had a distinct scent that those in the same situation could smell from afar. Sarah reached into the pocket of her tattered coat, the coat she wore when she arrived. She placed a small object on the rough wooden surface. Clink, a plain gold ring. Simple, slightly misshapen from impact, and tarnished with time. Ethan looked at the ring, then at her. "Sarah, what is this?" "Daniel's," she said, her voice calm, but her fingers trembled as she withdrew her hand. "It's the only thing of value I held on to before the landlord threw us out. I was going to sell it for bus tickets to Denver, but—" She glanced toward the sleeping children. "We need this roof more than I need a memory." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He knew the ring's value wasn't in its meager gold content. It was the testament to a life, a love, and a loss she was still enduring. "I can't." He pushed the ring back toward her. "Take it, Ethan." Her voice hardened, the mother's fierce resolve rising. "You save my children's lives. You feed them, you give them shelter. Don't let a man's pride hurt them. If you lose your home, we're on the streets too. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Lily and Mia." Her words were sharp as a knife. Yes, she was right, but there were lines a man couldn't cross. Taking the last possession of a widow to pay his own debt? He'd rather rob a bank at gunpoint. Ethan stood up abruptly, picking up the ring. Sarah thought he was accepting it, her shoulders slumping in relief. But Ethan walked around the table, took her calloused hand, and placed the ring in her palm. He closed her fingers around it, holding them tight for a second. "Keep it," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. "Your husband. He wouldn't want you selling it to a stranger. I'll figure it out. I promise." Sarah looked at him, her eyes glistening with tears. She pulled her hand back, pressing the ring against her left chest. "Where will you get the money?" she whispered. "I have my ways." Ethan lied for the second time that day. "Go to sleep. I'll leave early tomorrow." The town of Miller's Pass lay nestled in the valley, bleak and gray like the winter sky itself. The county administrative office reeked of old paper and cheap coffee. The boiler whirred constantly, making the atmosphere in the wooden cabin feel strangely oxygen-depleted. Sarah Brennan stood there, still clutching Mia's tiny sweater. She looked at Ethan as if he had just spoken a foreign language. Her hazel eyes widened, reflecting panic, mixed with a heartbreakingly fragile ray of hope. "Change," she repeated, her voice broken. Are you going to send us away?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked down at the floor, where Shadow lay motionless, his amber eyes darting between the two human occupants. Then he did something Sarah had never seen any man do for her, not even her late husband, Daniel. He knelt, not the romantic movie kind of kneel with roses and candlelight. This was the kneel of a soldier before battle, heavy, definitive, and full of commitment. The old wooden floor creaked under his weight. "Sarah," Ethan said, his voice deep, resonating from his chest. He looked up at her, and for the first time, Sarah saw the naked vulnerability in his habitually cold, gray eyes. "They refused the tax extension. This house is on a countdown." Sarah stumbled back a step, covering her mouth to suppress a sob. So we'll hear me out." Ethan raised a hand, a reassuring yet commanding gesture. "The problem isn't just the house. The problem is you. It's Lily. It's Mia and Lucy. If I lose the house, you're on the street. If I keep the house, but you have no legal standing, social services will come. They will separate Lily because her paperwork is unclear. They'll separate Mia and Lucy because you're homeless." Sarah's face went white. That was her worst nightmare, the thing she had been running from for 5 years. "But there's one way," Ethan continued, his voice becoming firmer, like mapping out a combat strategy. "One way to legalize your presence here. One way for me to have the right to stand up for the children before the law. One way so that no one, from old Mrs. Merrill to the sheriff, can touch this. Family." He took a deep, cold breath. "Marry me." 3 words. Short. Sharp. Sarah was stunned. The sweater in her hand fell to the floor. "Ethan," she stammered. What are you saying? We've known each other for 4 days. You don't love me. I'm a burden. I'm not marrying you for romance." Ethan cut in, his voice brutally honest yet strangely sincere. "I'm marrying you. Out of duty. Because the truth is I want to protect this family. I can't fight the system with a gun, Sarah. I have to fight it with the law. If you're my wife, this house is yours. The children are my dependents on paper. I'll have the right to claim them, custody rights, the right to kick out anyone who dares to come here demanding to take them. He took her trembling hand. It was calloused, rough, but warm. I can't promise to be romantic or sweet. I'm a scarred, temperamental old soldier. But I swear, as long as I'm standing, no storm will ever touch you and the children again. Never. Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks, falling onto the back of Ethan's hand. She was used to being rejected by the world, considered surplus, chased away. Never, not once, had someone knelt and asked to share the burden of her life. Not because she was beautiful or rich, but simply because she needed protection. It wasn't love at first sight. It was salvation. She knelt with him, facing him on the cold wooden floor. She looked deep into the eyes of this stranger, the man who opened his door in a blizzard, who gave up his last meal, and who was now ready to put his entire life on the line to shelter her and her children. Yes, she whispered, choked with tears. I agree. Please, please keep us. Ethan squeezed her hand tight. A covenant was established, not in ink, but in tears and survival. 2 weeks later, the town of Miller's Pass was still shrouded in the late winter chill, but today the sky seemed higher and bluer. The town hall, once a hell of cold administrative procedures, was decorated today with a few simple white ribbons. Rumors spread faster than the wind. The whole town knew that the mountain man Ethan Hale was marrying the drifter girl. Curiosity drew a crowd that packed the ceremony room. In the small waiting room, Sarah stood before a mirror, her hand trembling as she smoothed the skirt of her dress. It wasn't new. It was a vintage wedding dress, made of ivory satin with discreet long sleeves, adorned with tiny pearls at the neckline. It was gracefully, classically beautiful. The biggest surprise wasn't the dress, but the giver. Yesterday morning, a large box was delivered to the log cabin door. No card, just a hastily scrawled note. Don't embarrass me. Wear this. It fit me 30 years ago. J.M. Janet Merrill, the crusty old woman from the tax office, the one who had bitterly scolded Ethan. She had sent her own wedding dress, perhaps somewhere beneath the cynical veneer of a meticulous civil servant. Her heart still beat with a little compassion, or perhaps she, too, had once been a young woman yearning for protection. Mommy is beautiful. Mia's shout pulled Sarah back to reality. The 5-year-old twins were spinning around their mother, dressed in 2 clean, ironed old floral dresses. Lucy stood beside them, adjusting the bow on her sister's collar, her expression serious but her eyes sparkling with joy. The door opened. Ethan walked in. Sarah held her breath. He wore a stiff, white shirt, sharp black trousers, and an old but well-fitting wool suit jacket. His beard was trimmed, revealing his masculine, angular face. He didn't look like the messy hunter of everyday life, but like the man in the faded wedding photo hanging on his wall. Only older, more reserved, and with eyes that held more storms. Ethan froze when he saw Sarah. In the wedding dress, she was no longer the skinny, fearful refugee. She radiated a gentle, resilient beauty, pristine as a wildflower blooming in the snow. You look. Ethan cleared his throat, awkward. You look very good. Sarah laughed, a soft, relieved sound that broke the tension. You look quite handsome yourself. Shadow squeezed between them, barking loudly once. The dog wore a bright red fabric bow, the twins' artistic creation, looking both dignified and comical. Let's go. Ethan offered his hand. The Reverend is waiting. The ceremony room was packed. Sheriff Reeves stood in the corner, nodding to Ethan. Even Janet Merrill was present, sitting in the back row, her face still impassive, as if she were there to audit books rather than attend a wedding. But her eyes softened when she saw her familiar wedding dress on Sarah. Reverend Stone, a kindly man with white hair, smiled at the reluctant couple. We are gathered here today. His voice resonated warmly, to witness the joining of 2 souls who have found each other in life's storm. Marriage is not just about love. Marriage is about shelter. It is a home. It is the safest refuge humans can offer each other. He turned to Ethan. Ethan Hale, Do you promise to protect, shelter, and respect this woman, to cherish her as your own flesh and blood, sharing every burden and every joy until death do you part? Ethan turned to Sarah. He didn't look at the Bible. He looked directly into her tear-filled hazel eyes. I do, he said, his voice echoing, firm as a nail hammered into wood. I promise to be her windbreak. I promise to protect her and the children. With all my strength, with my life, until my last breath. The audience was silent. That wasn't a hollow vow. It was a soldier's oath. And you, Sarah Brennan, Reverend Stone continued. Edo, Sarah said, her voice trembling but clear. I promise to turn his house into a home. I promise to stand by him, to warm his coldest winter days, and never to let him be alone again. I now pronounce you husband and wife. The applause began scattered, then swelled like rain. But the most magical moment had not yet come. Just as Ethan leaned down and placed a gentle, respectful kiss on Sarah's forehead, two small figures darted onto the altar. Lily and Mia, the 5-year-olds, unable to contain their excitement, had broken all protocol. Papa! Lily's clear shout rang out, bright as a silver bell. Ethan started, turning around. The two children were reaching out their arms to him, their eyes bright with absolute trust. Without thinking, Ethan dropped to one knee, spreading his solid arms wide. Both girls rushed into his embrace at once. He lifted them both up. The scene was like a slow-motion replay of that fateful night. It was Ethan. It was two twins in his arms. But last time it was in a blizzard, life and death, and utter terror. This time, in the warm light of the town hall, it was laughter, pretty dresses, and overflowing happiness.